If you love champagne-slick nights, impossible choices, and two powerful men who make ordinary hearts feel dangerous, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Comment Team CEO or Team Right Hand if you already picked a side. Now breathe. This is my story. The Gala was precisely the sort of ocean where faces floated like polished coins. Expensive, shallow, and impossible to keep. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom poured with light. Crystal chandeliers, mirrored columns, the kind of room that turned debt into glitter. I had said yes because my editor begged, because my freelance column needed a fresh angle, and because an invitation with honorary guest, stamped on vellum, felt like a ticket out of my small, sensible life for one night. I did not expect to be noticed. Emma Hayes, 31, freelance culture writer. A wardrobe partly thrifted and partly bought in quiet rebellions. I arrived alone in a navy dress I had chosen because it made my shoulders look squared and my debts look smaller. My hair was pinned back in a loose knot. My lipstick was not the shade of millionaires, but it held. The event was a fundraiser for urban renewal, a cause the city loved to photograph while ignoring in practice. CEOs smiled at plaques with the bored favor of men who owned entire streets. Waiters moved like liquid silver. The room hummed with the perfume of people who paid to be seen doing good. I circulated with a notebook and a polite smile, my voice small in the corridors where big decisions happened. I took notes on speeches about community investment and watched a handful of men clap like they were donating their conscience for the night. My article would be scathing and truthfully a little tender. It is easy to love a city you have to wake up early to notice. He saw me the way certain things are noticed. Not because they must be, but because they are unexpected. Ethan Carlisle, CEO, boardroom sovereign, philanthropist on press releases, was taller than I had imagined and younger than I expected, with hair the color of late autumn and a face that made lines look like intentional architecture. He wore a tux that fit like an opinion and a smile that made people forget they were on camera. He moved through the room like air, calculated, silent, efficient. We collided because of a spilled glass. A server's hand trembled and rose scattered like a confession across my notebook. Ethan's hand closed over the rim before the drop could hit the paper. He apologized as if my time was a currency he should not waste. His voice was smooth and amused. "I'm so sorry. I owe you a drink that doesn't try to ruin your notes." I smiled, embarrassed, handing him napkins and dignity. "It's fine. I'll write it off as performance art." He laughed, and the sound made the people around us lean in slightly, as if the world had some score to settle with the idea of charm. He introduced himself, Ethan Carlisle, and when he extended a hand, his palm was warm and steady. He had the kind of presence people mistook for kindness. I found myself answering the questions he asked like a person in a mirror. Where I worked, what I wrote, how I ended up here. As we talked, the room seemed to shift into a different tempo. He asked fewer questions than he listened, and his gaze made me feel like a story he intended to read until late at night. There was a sincerity in him that felt dangerous because I could not tell if it was practiced. He invited me to sit at the corporate table. An audacious move. And I accepted because my editor's voice lived in my head like practical gravity. Across the room he watched. Gavin Mercer had been Ethan's right hand for as long as anyone could remember. Where Ethan commanded rooms, Gavin commanded outcomes. He was not shadowy, he was reliable. Blonde, close-cropped hair. A jaw that suggested authority and hands that suggested a lifetime of steady work. He moved through the gala like someone performing safety. His presence felt like insurance. He had eyes that cataloged the smallest things and a smile that rarely surfed to the surface. When Gavin approached, there was a courtesy in his step. "Miss Hayes," he said, with a nod that acknowledged a name that he'd heard the media whisper in hallway echoes. "I'm Gavin. Ethan speaks highly of your column." Ethan's expression when Gavin introduced himself to me was a quiet amusement, like a man who supplied gifts and then watched to see which one you preferred. Gavin's look at Ethan contained the patient knowledge of a man who had weathered decades of boardroom storms with his boss. There was chemistry, but it wasn't romantic between the two men. It was a practiced symmetry. One who built and one who ensured the building didn't fall. The night slipped on, and the more I talked to Ethan, the more he made me feel as if our meeting was inevitable, like chapters aligning in a book neither of us had yet read. He lifted his glass like a man who wrote press releases about generosity, and meant a select few of them, The conversation wandered from books to city planning to how a good sandwich can be the simplest luxuries. He asked me about my mother. He remembered a small line I had written about summer mornings. He made me laugh in a way that felt like a soft promise. Then, as if pulled by gravity, Gavin reappeared. He had been watching, there was no doubt. He mentioned something small, an anecdote Ethan had told him about me earlier, and I saw in his eyes not ownership but something fiercer, protectiveness. Ethan likes to bring interesting people to these things, Gavin said, the sentence even and practical. It keeps him honest. Ethan's smile contained a warning. Gavin, don't sell me short. Gavin met his boss without theatrics. Never. I recognized the dynamic. Gavin as the ground, Ethan as the weather. I also recognized the pull Gavin's steady presence had on me. Like the tide that keeps you safe if you let it. There was a wordless exchange between the men, a charting of territory I didn't yet understand. To them I was a ripple. To me they were whole storms. Later the gala moved to the terrace. The city spread glittering below like a map of promises. Ethan walked me out, and Gavin trailed close enough that his shadow kept pace between us. The jazz band on the terrace played low, knowing songs. Glass clinked. Firelight hidden in planters made the night intimate. You must be exhausted, Ethan said, offered me a seat, and then surprised me by sitting beside me instead of across. It felt like an invitation to make the world smaller. Tell me honestly, what do you actually think of these events? I told him the truth, that they were necessary theater. He listened as if my truth was a key. I want to change things that look like this from the inside, he said, gaze on the city as if plotting a course. But it can be lonely. Gavin's voice cut gently through. Lonely is a choice when you have the means to choose differently. The words between them held the ghosts of old debts. The way they spoke about loneliness made me feel like a third point in a triangle that had always existed. I thought of Anna, my sister, of the bills, of the small constant work of being someone who earns and counts and repeats. I also thought of the strange comfort of being seen. Ethan reached for my hand and pressed a card into my palm. His email, his office number, an invitation to an art panel he was chairing. If you ever want insight for your pieces, he said, I'd like to help. Gavin watched, and in his gaze was a question that asked, would I accept help in a way that invited the world to shape me? He stepped a fraction closer. If you ever need a ride home, he offered, call me. I know this city at the hours most people pretend it doesn't exist. It was an offer of different kinds of safety. I tucked the card into my clutch and felt my chest fill with small, urgent decisions. The night's climax arrived before I was ready. A commotion at the valet, a car collision barely outside the hotel, sent a ripple through the gala. Cameras pivoted. Guests moved toward the periphery like hawks. Ethan and Gavin stood in the center of it before I registered what had happened. Their coordination was tacit, a choreography of men who knew each other's moves before the music started. Someone in the crowd shouted that the driver was hurt. Another voice said it was a journalist, and then someone else said it was nothing. In the confusion, a man with red eyes pushed through, shouting about a story that could ruin a reputation. I took a step back. The air felt sharp. Ethan's hand closed over my arm with a confidence that made something in me relax and something else tighten. Stay with me, he said low. Gavin's jaw set. He moved to the balcony rail and looked over the edge, calculating. Emma, he said, using my name as if protection were the next step in a plan. You should come with us. It's not safe for you to be alone right now. The two men looked at each other. No argument in their eyes, only an unspoken question. Which way would I go? It felt absurd and utterly decisive. I realized then that the gala had become an arena not only for charity but for the first move in a game I hadn't known I was part of. I thought of calling a cab, of pretending everything was ordinary. Instead I let myself be guided, because at that moment, both hands felt plausible and fragile in different, combustible ways. Ethan extended his arm like a captain offering a compass. Gavin's offer was steady, like a hand on a shoulder that promised the world wouldn't tilt. Which one? I asked, half a laugh and half a plea. Ethan's eyes were clear and bright with the kind of certainty that builds empires quietly. Stay with me. I want to talk more than the press will allow. Gavin's smile was small but fierce. Come with me. I'll make sure you get home. I'll make sure you're safe. I hesitated and found in that pause the truth about myself. I wanted to be chosen for reasons I didn't have to invoice. For a heartbeat, I imagined both futures, one of polished displays and orchestrated change, the other of quiet protection in the spaces where the city's edges frayed. I climbed into Ethan's car first because his hand was the first that found my palm and because I was, in that moment, attracted to the idea of being seen and used to good things. The car smelled like citrus and leather, and as it pulled away, Gavin's figure receded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the back window like a promise and a warning. Ethan's chauffeur drove through streets lit by sodium lamps. He asked about my column and the city, and he listened with a focus that made me feel like more than an anecdote. The chauffeur took a shortcut to the river road and the city opened up in a darker, more honest way. Ethan, naturally, had plans about improving neighborhoods and he spoke of alliances as if they were loves. He was tender in a way that belonged to men who had learned to be gentle with power. When the car finally slowed outside my building, Ethan turned to me. "Tell me honestly, are you free for dinner next week?" he asked. I opened my mouth and then closed it because of a text from an unknown number. Don't trust the one who smiles loudest. Gavin. My throat closed. I looked at Ethan and felt the weight of a choice I hadn't known I needed to make. I stepped out of the car and when I turned, Ethan's expression had that same kind, strategic patience. "Call me," he said and pressed his card again into my hand. Across the street, under the sodium light, Gavin leaned against a lamppost, the shadow shaping him like a promise of steadiness. He met my gaze as if to say, "Your decision matters less than your safety, and I will be here." I tucked both cards into my clutch like contraband and walked up the stoop with the city at my back. The night's noise lingered like a bruise. I thought of loyalty, of power, of what it means to be chosen and what it means to choose. Two men had offered different kinds of home. One an empire with glass and plans, the other a steady, unglamorous shelter that didn't pretend the world was anything but sharp. My phone buzzed again. This time Ethan had sent a short message. "Dinner. Tuesday, 7 p.m. I'll pick you up." Below it, a signal blinked. "I'm serious." He watches. "Don't be careless." The city hummed. Choices are heavy until they are made, and then they become the shape of a life. I stared at the messages and felt the strange rush of power, and the quiet, terrifying knowledge that whichever hand I took that night would rewrite the next chapter. I did not decide that evening. I let the two cards press into my palm like small, pointed futures and went to bed with both names weighing like tides on my tongue. The choice, I realized, would not be about who could offer more, but who would make me want to stay when the lights went off. In the days that followed, both men reached for me in different ways. Ethan with invitations to events that smelled like possibility and scripts. Gavin with late-night texts that read like weather reports and check-ins. Each contact felt like a soft negotiation. And I, odd, ordinary, stubborn, found myself learning the dangerous geography of being wanted by powerful men. They would both try to take me home again. And when that night came at the end of a long week, I would finally understand that being chosen is not the same as being seen. It is a mercy. And sometimes the bravest thing is to choose the mercy you recognize in your own reflection. But decisions have a gravity of their own. And the city, as always, had other plans.